What up, Wizards? It's Dev, SBMTG. We like it a magic, and we got kind of a fun little thought experiment today because, boy, everyone is talking about Standard, and they won't shut up about it. In case you hadn't heard, Wizards is extending Standard to 3 years between rotations instead of 2 years. I cut a whole video about it yesterday. Getting pretty good traction. Thanks for the views and stuff. But if you haven't seen it yet, check that out. Now, as a consequence of that, it seems like over the last 48 hours, everyone's been talking about, well, what are they going to ban then if you're going to extend Standard? You have to do something about the objective sort of staleness of the format, even though Wizards doesn't want to admit that it's a stale format. But obviously, if you actually play Standard, you know that Rakdos / Grixis / some variation on mono black with some other colors in it, maybe Fable the Mirror Breaker, has been the most popular deck in Standard for about 12 years now, it feels like. So if they're going to extend Standard and Fable and Invoke Despair and 40 other cards aren't going to rotate out, it stands to reason that one of the next steps they would take, and they said they would take multiple steps to revitalize Standard, is maybe doing some stuff about some of these cards. And so every internet Magic player has their own precious little opinion about it, including myself, actually. That's what we're here for today. I'm going to give you my precious little opinion about it. But here's the thing. I'm a content creator. So my takes have to be spicy. They got to be spicy takes. But I think I have one of the appropriate level today because, I could come out here and just do what everyone's doing and be like, hey, the Fable of the Mirror Breaker and Invoke Despair and Sheoldred and get rid of these and all that. And do those cards annoy me? Yes. If I woke up tomorrow and those cards were banned, that was the action they took, would I be okay with that? Yeah. Again, the answer to both of those questions. Big fat yes, but I don't think it's very interesting to talk about banning those cards. No, today let's talk about banning a card, not advocate for banning a card. He said parenthetically. Those are two separate and very distinct things. Now let's talk about banning a card that you probably don't think of first and foremost when you think about the problem cards in the format that irritate you the most. But I nonetheless think you could argue very effectively for banning this thing. Now, originally, the card for this video was going to be Bloodtithe Harvester. I do think the Bloodtithe Harvester is a pretty good card. It put 20 copies in the top 8. It was in half of the top 8 of Pro Tour Mom, in case you hadn't seen results from that. A little bit of a spoiler, but yeah, half the decks are Rakdos midrange with Fable of the Mirror Breaker, and basically every deck that plays 4 Fable also plays 4 of this for a really good reason. Now, I want to reiterate that this is not the guy I want to talk about banning in this video, but there's a reason, many of them actually, that this was the first guy I thought about when I thought about making this video. He's a really strong card and remains, besides Fable of the Mirror Breaker, obviously, the best reason to mix in mountains with your swamps. I mean, you get a lot for not much on this guy, right? He's only 2 mana for a 3-power guy, and yeah, he does die to cut down. You got me, commenter, good job. But even if he does, he still leaves behind value in the form of a drawn card. That's pretty nice. He helps out reanimator decks by pitching cards every now and again, and it also really helps that he's basically the most famous at this point, most reliable copy target for Reflection of Kiki Jiki. This is a super strong card, yes. Altogether, I think it's just kind of a fun card to think about banning because what are the consequences of that, right? But like I said, there is another card besides Bloodtithe Harvester that doesn't have Fable or Invoke or the Apocalypse anywhere in its name that I actually think might be worth banning than any card I've named in this video so far. And that's Reckoner Bankbuster, believe it or not. Now, I know that there are probably some of you out here watching this video right now who are like, yes, finally, but I think the majority of you are going, huh? So let me explain this a little bit, and to do that, let me start with, I think, an especially important stat. Did you know that at Pro Tour March of the Machine, Reckoner Bankbuster had more copies in the top 8 than any other card in Standard? Did you know that it was in 7 out of the 8 top 8 decks at Pro Tour March of the Machine? Did you know that? The only deck it didn't show up in was Soldiers, because why would it show up in Soldiers? But everything else from Mono White to Rakdos to Ramp to Grixis, or Rakdos Reanimator rather, every single other deck besides aggro, this thing showed up in some number. As a matter of fact, it put a total of 23 copies in the top 8. This is actually a lot of stats. I apologize. I'm throwing numbers at you, but I think they're important numbers. 23 copies in the top 8. That is an average of nearly 3 per deck. And remember, a deck didn't play it at all. Now, I don't think that we're in some kind of smuggler's copter situation here where we're like, we got to ban this card or else. Like I said, I'm not really advocating for banning this. I'm just kind of pointing that out. It's one of the better cards in Rakdos. It's one of the better cards in mono white. And even though, again, it ain't Copter by a mile, it's kind of a great nexus point between a card like Copter and like Maze Mind Tome. And Maze Mind Tome was a perfectly acceptable card to have in Standard for a few different reasons, right? The meta was a little bit different. I'm not saying it wasn't, but also Maze Mind Tome couldn't attack for 4. Yeah, you see, because lesson learned, Wizards of the Coast, it turns out that being a 2-mana 4/4 that draws cards, and any deck can play it, is pretty good. Oh, also it makes its own pilot. It creates a creature eventually. Oh, when it does that, it also ramps you and gives you a treasure token. You can use any mana, but that's, come on, man. So why does it do all of that stuff? If it did just even one fewer of those things, it would still be a phenomenal card. But no, it does all that. 2-mana 4/4 that draws 3 cards and then ramps you when it's done and also makes its own pilot. Come on, man. I've compared this to Maze Mind Tome a number of times in the past, but honestly, this card is leagues, fathoms above a card like Maze Mind Tome. And honestly, again, not advocating for banning it, I'm just saying it is kind of screwing up the format a little bit, Like, it makes sure that just about any mid-range deck can compete with any other deck that's trying to draw cards. You are not going to, like, outdraw go an opponent, if that phrase means anything to you anymore. It's been a long time since we talked about draw go, but you cannot outdraw go. I'm going to double down on that phrase. Any opponent that's playing Reckoner Bankbuster, when you do get to that point in the game where you're down to top decks or whatever, it's basically whoever has Bankbuster and whoever has the most Bankbuster charges, more likely, is very likely to win that game. I think they've got the percentages on their side. Because quick tip here, and this is true, if you want to know who's winning a game of Magic without looking at board states or life totals, because those things can be deceiving, simply find out who's drawn more cards. They are usually the person who's actually in control of that game. And that's maybe the most important thing that Bankbuster does for you, is keeps you drawing cards, often at a point in the game where you're starting to run low on cards in your hand. But don't worry, it does plenty of stuff up until that point too. This thing has got your butt covered. Pretty much every axis, the entire course of the game, you drop it on turn 2. And oh no, did your opponent drop like a turn 3 Planeswalker? That's cool. Just play a creature on your next turn, crew the Bankbuster, get in on the Planeswalker, big freaking deal. Did they play a creature they're going to smash your teeth in with? No, again, not a big deal. Play a creature, crew the Bankbuster. You have a 4/4, which is bigger than anything they're playing at this early point in the game anyway. So it blocks, it attacks, it protects, that whole meme and all that stuff. It just does everything even early in the game. And let's say I play this on turn 2. On turn 3, I play a land and say go. Well, if my opponent doesn't give me anything to remove with a go for the throat or something, now I can draw a card off my Bankbuster. Hey, turn 4, I can remove your guy and still have mana to draw a card off my Bankbuster. Those are both extremely common lines in the current Standard. And again, like I've said this a couple times in this video, but that is for a reason. It's a strong line. Just kind of generically good, I think, is the issue with this card. Some cards that they end up banning are part of like really niche combos that end up completely flipping the table on turn 4 or whatever, your Splinter Twins and stuff like that. And then other cards are just generically powerful, especially cards that any deck can play. And those tend to pose problems some of the time. And I think that this belongs to the latter category. But even though it's generically powerful, it's not the most powerful card in almost any deck that it's in. Again, I think you could make the argument that like Fable the Mirror Breaker is a much more powerful card in a lot of ways than this. Or is it, right? You have to be playing Mountains to play Fable the Mirror Breaker. You basically have to have 2 removal spells to get rid of both of the things on Fable, so it's kind of a 2-for-1 in that way. It kind of draws cards for you. It ramps a little bit. Hey, this card does all that same stuff when you think about it. It just doesn't pitch cards into the graveyard, but it draws more cards than Fable of the Mirror Breaker. It ramps at least once, like you want your Fable to do, but it's not guaranteed to do, you know what I mean? And it becomes 4 power worth of stats. If your opponent tries to target it and you have 2 mana open, you can draw a card off of it. So it kind of 2-for-1 your opponent in that situation, Again, they're kind of similar cards in a lot of ways, but this one costs less and any deck can play it, and it can block 3/3s. Ultimately, though, Fable of the Mirror Breaker is the harder card to deal with, and I'm not going to argue that point. If you're going to ban a card in Standard, you probably have more powerful options in this, but Last point here, or one of my last points, I can't promise you anything, is that the most powerful cards are often not the ones, again, that get banned. You know, I just want to hammer in this point. A few years ago, I didn't think that Attune with Ether was a particularly powerful card, but it was such an important card to the energy decks that that's the one they banned. I didn't think Reflector Mage was a super powerful card, but they banned that one too. I don't think anyone could really figure that out at the time. But there have been plenty of bans over Magic's lifetime, and really just in the recent past even, that aren't the most powerful card in the deck that makes the whole deck tick, but it is a piece that you can take out from the Jenga stack and the whole thing doesn't fall over, but it is structurally a little bit weaker. And I think that's what you want for some of these decks. You don't want to completely blow out Rakdos and make sure that it can never exist again. I don't necessarily like that idea. I do like the idea of taking one strong piece out that doesn't completely disrupt several decks in the format. This does disrupt several decks in the format, but I use the qualifier completely there. So even though like mono white plays this card too and a couple of other decks, I think those decks can still live without it. They're just not as good. And at the end of the day, that's what I want. You know, if you power down some of these tier 1 decks like Rakdos and mono white, that just leaves more room for new decks to come in, or even existing decks that are tier 2 and 3 to come in and occupy that tier 1 space. And that's what we want. Or at least more accurately, that's how I feel. I have no idea how you feel, so why don't you tell me down there in the comments section? That's right, we're segueing into the outro. Just let me know how you felt about this, and remember, one more time, just casually reminding you that this is more of a thought exercise than anything else, social experiment, what have you, you know. I'm not really like standing on the top of the mountain and getting on my soapbox with a bullhorn saying like, ban Reckoner Bankbuster. Not really, I don't care that much. If you're going to ban anything in Standard, I think I've mentioned a few cards in this video that I won't bring up again that I think are probably better contenders. But I do think this card is deceptively powerful and warrants at least some thought on our parts when it comes to what we want to get rid of in this Standard. Again, I think there's a lot to be said for the fact that this was the most played card in the top 8 of the Pro Tour. But don't worry, we're not quite done. I got to do the couch card of the day. I'm going to fish it out there, but remember to check out the Twitch channel and the Patreon and all that stuff. Also, if you go to the description, you'll find links to that stuff and links to new videos that we've done just recently. If you want to hear me ramble on about the Standard extension, we did a video about that yesterday, as a matter of fact. Check out the description for that. But if you want to help out around here, the most important thing you can do is go to patreon.com/SBMTG. It's basically the only way I get a reliable paycheck for this work, and I'd like to continue doing this work. The only way I can do that is if you, specifically you, Alex, I don't know what your name is. If you go to Patreon and pledge $1 a month. But for that, I'll let you vote on what content we do around here, which is an okay deal. Could be better, but it's an okay deal. It's $1 a month is all I ask. Help out the channel. What card have I chosen off the couch? Oh, we got to draw again. It's an island. We got an island. Now it is the Mirage Island. It is the Mirage Island. That's good. I like Palm Tree Island, but let's try something else. Get down in there deep. What are you? It is the meme. We drew a meme. It is Grizzly Bears, ladies and gentlemen. Everyone's favorite. We just call 2-mana 2/2s Grizzly Bears because this card exists. Nice. A 3rd edition Grizzly Bears in perfect condition. Everyone assumed after yesterday's video that I damaged all the cards on the couch. None of them are damaged. They're fine. I don't know why you guys are so weird. But anyway. Grizzly Bears, not the most powerful card in the world, but one of the most iconic cards we could have pulled off this couch. But anyway. I guess I'm done for this one. Just again, log all your thoughts down there in the comments section so that I know them. It's important that I know your thoughts. But anyway, I'm done for this one, so y'all. So I'll catch you cats later. I'm Deb from the place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.